welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your hosts, Buddy Sotelo Esquire and Evan Ginsberg. Evan, would you like to introduce our guest for tonight?
Absolutely. He is a writer, a film historian, a martial artist. He is a true Renaissance man. I'm just basically, just a brief
horror aficionado
and a comic aficionado also. Tony Caro, how are you tonight, Tony?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you. So you've known Evan for some time now, right? You
on and off. I think maybe going back. I haven't spoken to Evan in I don't know how long, but I remember maybe 1990 when I started subscribing to the old newsletter.
Wow. Yeah. Going back.
Yeah.
Back.
Tell us a little about yourself and how all those wild interests all managed to come together, you know?
Well, what had happened was even when I was a little kid, and I mean, I'm going back maybe to 1976, like just when I was barely conscious. I remember seeing Bambi in the theater, and I remember peripherally the TV was always on in the background in the home, and I would always pick up on these movies and TV shows that would play. But more than just watch them, I even when I was a very little kid, I wondered how they were made. And I kind of knew that these were productions. I knew that they were something that people created. So my perspective, even going back from being very, very young, was different. It just wasn't disposable entertainment. I mean, well, it was, but I was always enamored with, like, how did they do that? Who made it? Who were these people? Because, you know, remember back in the late 70s, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all the TV shows that cover the entertainment industry. So that it was very mysterious, and a lot of the information that you were fed about it was controlled. You know,
now, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Okay.
Philadelphia. Yeah. Channel 17.
My condolences.
The great ending.
My condolences.
Yeah, Philly's a little wacky, yeah. But it's a great wrestling town. It always was. So.
Are you a Pats or Geno's kind of guy?
I would have to say Geno's, because that's where the family used to eat. Because my grandmother's house was a block away from Pat's and Geno's, and Geno's was the preferred, the preferred steak shop for everyone in the family. Yeah.
Just need to know that from anyone from Philadelphia. I always ask which side of the street they go to on that. Yeah. There's a lot that's told about that story. But so continue on saying about when you were growing up and how you were influenced.
Well, what happened was I would go to the movies on Sundays. I was always a Sunday matinee guy. I did that through like junior high school, like all the way through adulthood. And then I started to read a lot about films. And other than Famous Monsters of Filmland, the magazine, which was on its last legs in the 70s and the 80s, 83 it went out of business, there wasn't that much out there on film history, or I should say mass market. If you wanted to get cinema scholarly stuff, you could probably find it. But to walk into a bookstore and see like a mass market trade paperback on a movie was very rare. And then I think I can't remember the bookstore, but I went into a bookstore and I started noticing there was a section, a small amount of books, but they had one on the making of the Batman TV series, one on the making of the Munsters, one on the making of the Kung Fu television series. And that kind of, caught me back. I didn't even know that people were putting stuff out there like that. And largely because a lot of them were smaller press publications like Fanico Enterprises, St. Martin's Press in I think the East Village. There weren't that many people putting that stuff out there. But then as time grew on, you started seeing more nonfiction books about cinema history that were written for the average person, the fan, as opposed to the like say a film comment magazine, which was really more literary. It's a little bit. It was still a little bit went over the head of the average person because it was really for the hardcore cineast scholar. But over time, I started buying more of those, and I started to do my own writing on that type of stuff. But I really wasn't into writing about history, as in like on December 1973, this movie went into production, yada, yada. Because there's so many books like that out there that I had nothing to add for that. So I started looking at it from a more thematic perspective. I kind of like to look at the films from what kind of themes they were getting across, but most importantly, trying to get across the cultural aspect of it. You know, I mean, not to ramble, but I was watching Soy and Green this week. I had the DVD forever and I was watching it. And Soy and Green takes place in 2022, you know, but it was made in 1972.
Edward G. Robinson.
Yes, his last role. Yes, and he was stone deaf during the making of the movie, believe it or not. He lost his hearing, yeah, and you would never even tell because he just was such a pro, and the guy could get his cues without hearing anything, which was pretty nuts. But Soy and Green, it's set in 2022, made in 72. Soy and Green is 1972. It's just a twist. It's just a fantasy version. You know, we don't have rotary phones and pay phones in 2022 anymore.
Well, the thing about Soylent Green is that it varies from the taste of it varies from person to person.
Oh yeah, it's wide open. You could watch that 20 times and get 20 different takes on it. But when you look at it, you're looking at a perception of 1972, 1973 funneled through an image of the future. So it tells you about the current cultural landscape, but it does it in a setting that's 50 years into the future. And I thought that was kind of cool. And things like that kind of appealed to me. Things like that were things I used to like to write about.
Well, that's great. So, and so you also have a huge horror background. I mean, I want to get into your wrestling stuff, but I was very piqued by both your comic book stuff and your horror background. Let's talk a little bit about your horror background.
Got to go back to 1977, 1978. That's when I used to watch the last season of Dr. Shock in Philadelphia. He passed away at a young age, at 42. And he had a weekly horror show that was similar to like every other horror host across the country. It was a formula.
Yes, I grew up with Bob Wilkins and Creature Features out here in the Bay Area.
Oh, wow, yeah. And then John Stanley in the Bay Area, too. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah. And what happened was the Universal horror movies were a staple, you know, on Saturday afternoons. And you also would get AIP films. You would get Hammer. You would get one movie that always struck me was Paul Naschy's two movies, Frankenstein's Bloody Terror and Assignment Terror. And they were ubiquitous on UHF in the late 70s. And they're fun movies. I enjoy them. And at that time, they were just considered disposable entertainment. And today, I mean, Naschy, nobody even cared about him for like 20, 30 years. And now they put a Blu-ray special edition, 3,000 limited edition. And boom, in a week, they're sold out, just sold out. And then they're going for $100 on eBay. So sometimes it takes a while for people to appreciate you. But those movies really, they were just very popular, and they just kind of, but people didn't respect them. They always considered them junk. And then later on, I would say in recent years, maybe the past 20, 25 years, you would see more and more people treating them with more respect, which is something that they didn't have. Outside of the fanzine and outside of maybe a magazine like Castle of Frankenstein, the 70s and the 80s, you really didn't see people really take horror movies serious as literature. It really wasn't until the 90s with the big magazine boom, resurgence, that you started seeing it. So that's kind of what influenced me. But oh yeah, I mean, I love horror movies. I watched them my whole life, and I got a nice little opportunity through horrornews.net to write a column for them. So I think I've done like 23 or 24 essays monthly, just not cranking out these things every week, but every 6 weeks, give them something really, really good, so kind of try to take a different take on some old films, like just a different perspective, and just hope people dig it.
I find it interesting as a New Yorker. the Grindhouse that we used to go to on 42nd Street, Times Square, and even local theaters like the Astor in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. A lot of those films, which, were not highly respected back then, I'm seeing today at Museum of Modern Art, at the Museum of the Moving Image. They have a Santo movie running this weekend. On the Criterion Network, they just had a blaxploitation festival. Sometimes I'm actually surprised that some things that we thought of as disposable entertainment back in the day now is looked at as art, and I think it's great. I saw Enter the Dragon at the Museum of Modern Art, and it was packed, and the audience was incredibly responsive to it. And Bruce Lee's daughter herself said she was honored that they ran it there. And, I think it's part of being a film buff. I don't particularly like the film snobs, Yeah. And, I'll watch anything from Art House to Grindhouse and enjoy it depending on what mood I'm in. But I think it's great that, for example, Hammer horror today, like horror of Dracula, is considered, art as opposed to, this was just schlock back then. I think the respect has grown over the decades. What's your take on that?
Well, the people who grew up watching it 20 years ago are pretty much the people now who are editing the magazines and putting out the material that reviews all this stuff. Like when Horror Dracula came out, number one, it was in color, and color was too shocking for a horror movie. Horror movies were generally almost 99% black and white. And when you shoot a horror movie in black and white,
well, it was also cheaper to do it in black and white. They a lot of them had to be low budget, so doing it in black and white made it a lot cheaper for them to film.
Oh yeah, that's what Hammer knew. They had to do it in color because they didn't really think they could do a black and white film that would attract anybody. They needed a little oomph. So shooting it in color, and then remember, blood on in a lush color film is really jarring. So 1957, when Horror Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein came out, it was a bit much for audiences at that time. So your general critic kind of didn't like it. They kind of would give them bad reviews. They just didn't like I shouldn't say all the critics gave them bad reviews, because some of the early Hammer movies did get some nice reviews, but they saw it as just being a little too violent, a little too over the top, and they wanted to put a damper on it. And then when the films become successful, and now you're doing 5 movies or 6 movies, then they get resentful because they didn't want it to be successful in the first place. So now their subsequent reviews, they just want to throw cold water on it. Myself personally, like, if you're going to do the 5th entry in a horror movie series, why would you care what the New York Times reviews? That's not their bag. What do you expect to see? That's not who I would go to. I would probably go to a critic who knows a little bit about the history and appreciates it, so that when they give it when they give it their stamp of approval or their thumbs down, it carries some weight, So a lot of stuff wasn't meant for the mainstream. It was meant for 1 week, 2 weeks. Audiences come in, and even today, a horror movie opens big. The next weekend, you get the drop off, and then the third week it drops off, and then by the 6th week, it's done. They open big in 1 or 2 weekends, and then they're out. That's just the way that business model works. So
tell me a movie that genuinely scared you.
Well, the one that comes to mind is Death Wish 2, and it's not a horror movie, but it was just too much. Michael Winner just went too far with the violence, and that kind of not just me, but that's pretty much anybody who ever watched Death Wish 2 for the first time will tell you. But in terms of like a horror movie that really, really scared me, let's see, I would have to say even though it's not a great film, The Shining has a lot of problems with it, but it comes off more, even you don't know if Jack Nicholson's character is really seeing ghosts or if he's really going insane. And that idea of being locked up with somebody who's, you have nowhere to go, you can't escape, and this person's mindset is descending into madness. That kind of hangs with you. Maybe I'll go with another Stephen King film too, like Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot, the TV movie, was really creepy, and they really knew how to creep you out. Mainly because they didn't throw everything at you right away. It was like a slow burn to the reveal, and then when the reveal happens, it kind of catches you. You know, even though you expect it, you're still caught off guard. So yeah, I think those two would probably be ones that really, really have a scare factor for me.
Buddy?
Oh, I also wanted to ask if you ever had the Aurora models, the monster models growing up.
Growing up, no, but they were reissued by Polar Lights, and they were reissued by another company I can't remember. So I did purchase the reissues and I think I might have did like 20 of them, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, because I was just buying them every week and building them every week because I had some time on my hands and I was doing my writing during the day, and then at night I would spend a half hour building the model kits. And I built so many of them that I had to stop because I couldn't put them anywhere. But they were fun. I like painting them. Yeah.
What's your favorite one? What's your favorite one?
Bride of Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein was a great model kit because they really put a lot of attention into the laboratory, which meant you had a lot of little pieces that kept falling off, and you had to go grabbing them, reattaching them, re-gluing them. But yeah, that was a really cool one. Yeah. That actually, even the re-release goes for a lot of money now because it was popular. But yeah.
I am a fan of the opera.
Oh yeah, I had the original.
I was a big fan of that. I thought that was a really well put together piece. But
yes, it was. With the guy
leaving Evan out of this, Evan, you probably didn't do any of that stuff, so I don't want to have you totally ignored on here. What other horror questions do you want to throw at Tony here?
As someone a bit older, I grew up on Hammer, and I love Cushing and Lee. And I think it's interesting that a lot of younger fans today do not really appreciate Hammer because you have the initial 15 to 20 minutes of build up before there's even the first kill. And I think today the younger audience expects ultra violence quickly, and they're judging
CGI. You know, if you come out with a rubber mask now, you know, my 11-year-old daughter isn't even scared of people in prosthetics and rubber masks. You know, if they aren't giant CGI monsters that are, you know, over the top, she's like, what's scary about that? She's not even scared of that stuff.
Well, if that's what's happening, it's the problem is usually with the directing and the script, because if somebody knows how to build tension or capture your attention, they'll get it. A lot of the horror movies that come out, they're rush jobs, and they are, as it was explained to me, they think in terms of trailer. They think in terms of marketing. So when they come up with an idea, when you're plotting out a horror movie, remember, a lot of them are not spec scripts. They're not something that a lot of them are produced. They're kind of developed. So what happens is money men or producers or development people will think of a horror character, and they'll think of a premise, and then they'll think of 3 scenes, all of which is going to go into a trailer, all of which is going to go into a teaser, all of which is going to go into marketing materials. And that's what's going to sell the movie for the big weekend open. The script then, and it becomes secondary. It's just, you're just slopping things together around all that marketing material, which is why so many of these movies stink. And it's also why you see a lot of violence, because they have basically a boring film, and they got to go throw something out there to capture your attention every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because they know you're going to doze off. And that was a Grindhouse approach. The Grindhouse did. That's why when they talk about movies like Zombie or Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, where they talk about these crazy violent scenes that people don't remember the movie, they don't remember the plot, they don't remember anything, but they remember those crazy scenes, because when those movies played in a Grindhouse theater, they knew the audience didn't care about the dialogue, they didn't care about the plot. They were there for the action, but you couldn't have action all the way through. You had the climax. But in the middle, the beginning, here or there, they throw out a shot.
Talk to Michael Bay about whether or not you can have action all the way through in a 2.5-hour movie.
Oh, it drains you. It drains you. It becomes overload. It's too much action. It doesn't slow down, and you get burned out. And I think the worst movie that did that was Van Helsing, because Van Helsing.
Oh God, that was awful. God, that was awful.
Instead of going rising action, falling action, it was.
Well, the Transformers movies are just like that too. Where it's just one giant blah, or Shanghai, which we saw. I mean, it's a good movie, but there's so much like constant action going at you that there's no chance to digest any of it. And after a while, you just are like, oh, okay, there's a computer animated dragon. That's nice. And all this stuff. You're just waiting for it to end. Or I almost think that the new Batman movie suffers from that quite a bit. Yeah, action overload.
You have to get the action in there, but you have to pace it. And when you do too much of it, you bore your audience, because you can't keep getting the reaction from them, because you've gotten that same reaction 2 or 3 times at the beginning of the movie. Now you're trying to get it at the end, and you kind of lose your audience.
You saw the new Batman movie, right?
I did not see it yet, believe it or not.
It's exhausting. It's not an enjoyable cinematic experience to watch, because it's 3 hours long. And if it's not a documentary about JFK or Gandhi, why is an action movie 3 hours long? I still don't understand that. Nobody's explained this to me. And when you look back at the Hammer films, they're all an hour and a half, period. That's it. They're never more than like 1 second over 90 minutes.
They weren't allowed.
Yeah, well, and it's all for the better, because they wrap things up a lot quicker. When you have 3 hours to meander over a 1 hour plot, it's really gonna get you. Either got to have long action scenes or stuff that's just raw filler that doesn't do anything to advance any plot or make people care more about the characters. And that's what Evan brings up all the time, and I agree with him. You don't have, that's one thing that made The Shining really matter, is that you did care about the characters in The Shining. You did care about what was happening to Shelley Duvall and the kid and Jack Nicholson. You cared about them. And I didn't care one bit about any character that was in the new Batman movie. Not one.
That's the key. You have to care about the characters. I recently saw the Doctor Strange movie, and I'm a very casual superhero fan. I watched maybe 1 out of 3 of the Marvel films, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, one, I don't know what's going on, because I missed 2/3 of these films, and they're all interconnected somehow in this multiverse or whatnot. So I'm like, who is this character? Why should I care about this character? Then there's a bombardment of CGI, and basically I enjoy it, but the next morning I forget about it. It's like the popcorn you're eating in the theater. It's just like a piece of fluff, and you forget about it the next day. Whereas a great film stays with you forever. And I don't know. What's your take on that, Tony?
You mean in comic book movies in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's very few that deeply move you, and that you consider quote unquote art.
I thought Avengers Endgame was brilliant. I thought that was the perfect way to end a story arc, because they had been building, And they kind of realized this is going to run out of steam. So we got to put an end to this, and then we'll reboot it. Not reboot it, but then move on to another phase so that we don't bore our audiences with the same characters and the same.
Yes, they can bring you Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. I was a Moon Knight fan going back to when his first book came out in 1980, and Moon Knight's a strange character. I was shocked that they actually made that into a series, because they say that Moon Knight was, Marvel's ripoff of Batman, and some people will say, well, no, that's not true. I'm like, no, it is true. He was Batman and all, and they just switched Moon for Bat, but they didn't. They didn't know who this character was supposed to be when he first came out. That he was like an anti-hero, and then he had an alter ego that was Bruce Wayne, or similar to Bruce Wayne, and then they had another alter ego for him that was a mercenary. And then over time, they started to claim he had multiple personality disorder to explain all this. So over the years, you had essentially a really cool character that was derivative of another character. So they had to keep experimenting with him. And finally now, something like 40 years later, after the character debuted, they finally come up with a way to tell his story in a coherent manner. And it's a neat character. It's a B, but when you're getting into B grade and C grade characters, sometimes their powers or how they're presented or their origin stories aren't that great. That's why they're B and C characters. But sometimes you'll get a talented artist or you'll get a talented writer who wants to do something different, but that writer probably doesn't have the experience or the drag where they would trust him with Spider-Man. So what they'll do is they'll assign that writer, that artist, to a book that's not selling, or a character that there's nothing to lose, trying to experiment a little. And that's how you got Frank Miller on Daredevil. That's how you got
Steve Leialoha on Spider-Woman.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at any B or C grade character, I don't think there's any B or C characters anymore today, because I think the sales of the book make them all unimpressive. I don't think comic books don't sell like they used to. But in the old days, if you pick up any B grade or second tier character in the 70s or the 80s, you'll probably read some of the best stuff that was coming out at that time. Like Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Werewolf by Night. These were all really great books in the 70s that didn't sell that well. But if you read The Incredible Hulk, 1977, 78, 1980, that book was selling crazy because of the TV series. And when you read it, flat. They didn't want to take any chances with it. They had consistent sales, and they said, don't rock the boat. Just do I
like the By Beast stories, personally. I like the By Beast.
Oh, I remember those. Yeah.
Hulk had, but that's me. That's just a me thing. But I did want to ask you, Marvel or DC? What did you collect more growing up, or did you buy both?
I started. Marvel was everywhere, and Marvel was what you saw more on the newsstands, because Marvel books, by and large, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, were selling a lot more than DC. But I started with DC House of Mystery. I started with Marvel. I would get, Spider-Man books here and there as a little kid. And then when I started buying them, I started buying House of Mystery. And then I shifted over to Marvel. And this would be like 1981, 82, 83. And then I was out of comic books for years. And then I started collecting again in the 90s when books were selling 1 million copies each every month. And at that time, I didn't see a difference between Marvel, DC, Image, or any of them, because at that point, I kind of knew that it was the writer and the artist who were driving it. And you could put a good artist, a good writer on any book, and you would get quality. So it really didn't matter. The only drawback with
except Al Milgrom.
Which one?
Except Al Milgrom.
Oh, he wasn't that bad. I like him.
He's a terrible artist. A good, decent enough writer, but I always hated his art. That's me.
He was okay. I generally could put up with a lot unless it was really, really clunky art or really stiff. But yeah, I mean, the drawback with the DC characters is they're older. So when they came out, you're going back to 1930s, 1940s, which means everybody has a cape and everybody has an outlandish look. You don't have that streamlined look that developed later on. So some of the DC characters could be a bit overpowered, like Superman. It's hard to build drama around Superman because he has no vulnerabilities. And, and the same even to a degree with Batman. I mean, they made him too smart. They made him too skilled. So that kind of undermines your ability to get any.
Spider-Man used to always get the crap beaten out of him from issue to issue, and I always kind of appreciated that because it made him relatable to myself.
Yeah, what happened is he also had to deal with the fallout of his personal life and his alter ego. So if he ran off dressed up as Spider-Man and saved some little kid, when he took the costume off, he had to go deal with his family for walking out on his job or walking out on his aunt when she was in the hospital. So there was always these Stan Lee and some of the other creative talent. They knew to give him consequences for his actions, and that kind of made up for the fact that physically he didn't have as many vulnerabilities, but psychologically he did. So that gave his stories a bit more meaning because he wasn't just trying to beat the villain. He also had to deal with the fallout. Whereas with Batman, the guy was a billionaire. He could just write a check to make most things go away. And then they crafted him as a bachelor. They crafted him as this guy living alone in the Batcave and in Wayne Manor. So he was isolated. So that was, there was no real depth to Bruce Wayne until many years later. So that's the one drawback you have with the DC characters. They're established as a certain way, and you expect them to be that way, but they're kind of stuck in the 40s. That's the only drawback. Like even if you watch the new Batman movie, that's a 1940. I haven't seen it before. Clips I've seen. That's a very 1940s, 1950s approach. I mean, that's Mildred Pierce. I mean, they're going for a film noir, look, which is they never stop making them, but they're very rooted to the 40s and the 50s. So that style kind of guides those type of films, even when they're new. So, yeah.
And Tony, there's so much content out there, whether it's comics or films or pro wrestling or whatnot. What motivates you to write?
Yeah, there was a book I have. It was written in the 1930s. It's called Art of Dramatic Writing, and it's not even really about writing. It's about being an actor. It's about plays. It's about creativity. And the author, he pretty much said that the reason creative people do what they do, they just want to be acknowledged. They want to pat on the back and told, hey, good work. And I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, you put your heart and soul into one of these things, you put it out, and if people tell you, that they enjoyed what you did and they liked it, or they think that you're talented at it, that's motivating. That makes you feel good. It makes you want to go out and do more of it.
And before Evan goes crazy on comic book stuff, I know he's probably like, can you ask any more comic book questions? But I just got to find out, what are your top 5 books that you own, in your opinion?
My top 5 books?
Yes.
That's a sore spot. I have The Punisher's first appearance, but it got damaged because so it's not worth what it could be worth. But I have the Punisher's first appearance, the original, not a reprint. I have the Kingpin's first appearance.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I got those for like $1.25 at, 40 years ago at the Comics Vault in Philadelphia. And I read them once and I put them away, and they're still in great condition. But so those would be the top two that come to my mind. Some of them I wrote about Killer Croc's first appearance in the Batman story arc. Now, those Killer Croc in his original version was a fantastic villain who had a lot of potential, and that story arc that led up to Batman's 500th appearance was very, very, very well written. And they tinkered with the character and they ruined him. They turned him into the Lizard, rip-off of the Lizard. Why? I don't know. It just was a casualty of reboots and reimaginings and resets, and this great character became a mediocre character. But that original 4-part story arc, that stuck with me. That was a really, really, really good story arc. Another one I would say would be I can't say any one particular story, but a lot of the EC comics, Tales from the Crypt and all that, they put out some really great stuff. And they were an anthology, so it's kind of hard to put one issue down because, or one issue as the best, because, you would have great stories spread over 20, 30 issues. And then if I had to give a fifth one to say that was my favorite, I would have to go with The Dark Knight Returns, because Frank Miller really, really changed how people approach writing comic books. That was really the first. And I wouldn't say the
kind
first.
Of movies to some extent. I think that was such a cinematic comic that it was really like a movie inside a book for most people.
Yes, he went for an epic. He went for something earth-shattering. He wanted something that was going to resonate. And he redefined Batman, but he didn't really redo Batman. He just focused on elements that were lost. Like I said, Batman originally was a character of the 1940s. He was a pulp radio type. He's of the
detective. He was a detective.
Exactly. He was close to the Shadow. He was close to Green Hornet. He was close to those radio programs of the 40s, but darker kind of. Well, even the radio shows could be dark. So with Dark Knight Returns, you got to return to the darker, more psychological driven Batman, and that fueled the movies. That's what you see in any Batman movie. Mostly all of them, you're seeing Frank Miller's version of Batman. You're not seeing, say, Jerry Conway's version. You're not seeing
Joel Schumacher's version.
Yeah, you're not seeing like even Bob Kane, the creator, and Bill Finger. You're really not seeing their version of Batman. You're seeing a very loose version of it that's been reinterpreted. So, but that's the one that works, because it's a dark character. I mean, Adam West being, his campy version was a parody, and it's great, it's fun, but it was a creature of the 1960s. The darker version of Batman works today, because you need an adult. If every comic book movie was for kids, then they'd all be the same. So you have to vary it up a little, and Batman gives you, an adult version of the character of a superhero to follow, and it works really well. So yeah, and you wouldn't have that if you didn't have Dark Knight Returns. You wouldn't have any of that. So that was a very influential book. It's worth reading every so often. I'll pull it off my bookshelf and thumb through it. I should have skipped Watchmen. I have to say Watchmen was really groundbreaking. I'll end up expanding this to 100 books. But those are the ones that really stick out to me the most.
And Tony, you're from Philly, so I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up pro wrestling. Some of the best nights of my life was seeing the NWA in Philly back in the 80s. What are your wrestling memories?
My earliest wrestling memories would be, and I'm probably jumbling a few things up, but as I remembered earlier when I told you about Dr. Shock, I remember Saturday afternoons being a double feature of the horror movies, and I remember Space 1999 popping up.
Oh, yes.
And I remember Saturday afternoons had WWF wrestling.
Barbara Bain was an unrated hottie of the 70s. Barbara Bain.
Oh, she was great. That was a great series. It just didn't have enough episodes. It was only like 39 episodes, so it wasn't something you could keep in syndication for long. But it was Space 1999 was cool. I just watched a couple episodes last week, popped them into my Netflix bin. But the wrestling that really grabbed me was I would watch Superstar Graham and the Grand Wizard.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't understand a word the Wizard said, but he got you. It's just he was able to captivate your attention. And Billy Graham, just that look, nobody, today, you have all the action stars and all the fitness people and all that, but people weren't cut and ripped and built like him. He looked like a superhero come to life. And Andre the Giant these were just magical characters. So I would watch it on and off through the late 70s into the early 80s. And then when I got cable, I started catching it on cable. And then I started going to events live. I mean, I would go to the Spectrum, and I would go to Jim Crockett Promotions at Civic Center. And, what people don't understand today is if you want to watch anything, you can just go on YouTube and you can watch hours of this stuff. In the old days, you had the house shows, you had your TV, and then you had the house show. And if you wanted to see these things, if you wanted to see a conclusion or you wanted to actually see a confrontation, you had to buy a ticket. You had to go there live. You had to shut up and pay attention to what was going on in the ring. And if you missed it, you missed it. So it was a totally, totally different experience because you were primed to actually go see this. Because it was an event. It was something you had to see. It was a moment in time. It was a live athletic show. And like I said, if you missed it, you missed it. So that made viewing it a little different. Also, in the old days, when you only had 3 channels, anything that was on TV meant more.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't, tomorrow I could have 1 million people follow me if I wanted to dump enough money into a social media campaign. And if I wanted to spend $1 to make 30 cents, I could pump up a YouTube channel and have 1 million people following me. Not that long ago, it didn't work that way. So that when you were somebody who could get out there and could be in front of an audience or have a following or be on television, it was like, wow, so they carried a lot of extra weight. So, when you saw, that's the thing, with pro wrestling today might be more mainstream popular, but pro wrestling in those days, they were a handful of people who could actually get on TV and be well known, so it was like, wow, it's just, they carried more of a mystique that way.
And tell me a little bit of, sorry, go ahead, Evan.
I was just going to say, Tony, before we run out of time, it's getting late in the show. Please tell us about your new book.
Oh, yeah. I have, I wrote a serialized sci-fi story on the Kindle Vella platform, and it concluded, so I released it as an ebook. And it's called Why is Cal Drawing Stick Figures at 3 a.m. in the 22nd Century, which is it's a long title, but I kind of borrowed it from, again, going back to the 70s. That was a very, 70s style film noir title or mystery title. What it is it takes place in the near future with a fellow by the name of Cal who works for a mysterious extortion ring. And what Cal does is he uses deductive reasoning and he uses old school profiling to crack through identity cloaking technology that high profile people use when they visit red light districts or vice trade areas. And he's kind of this lonely character who's locked away in a room that oversees a busy, vice-driven street. And he's been spending all this time there, essentially in his loneliness, profiling all these people and submitting information on them. And, eventually his mundane existence stops being mundane, because if you're going to pull shady stuff, eventually it blows back on you, and that's kind of what happens to him. So he kind of has to pay the piper for his less than mainstream existence. So yeah, so it was cool, and that's my first fiction book that I've released. But then I have my nonfiction book, which is Universal Monsters and Neurotics, which is deals with the psychological hang-ups of the human side to the monsters, and that came out last year. So, but yeah, I've just been keeping busy writing for horror news, writing for comic book historians, writing for cinema scholars, and writing for Kindle. Just keep very, very busy, very, very prolific.
Wow. I also am interested in your martial arts background. Can you give us just a little bit of that, while we have you here?
Yeah, I started doing martial arts I started in the late 80s, and then I started getting real serious with it in the late 90s. Martial arts has gone through a lot of changes over the past few years, and I kind of now almost exclusively do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I train over it. I live in Hollywood, so I train over with Higa Machado over in his school in Beverly Hills. And I've been also...
That's a pretty good school. That's a pretty good school.
Oh, yeah. Higan's a legend. Yeah, he's great. Yeah. And he's involved. He does a lot of work in the movie industry, too. He does a lot of acting, and he does a lot of fight choreography. And occasionally, jiu-jitsu is competitive. I'm up in age. I'll be 50 years old next month. But I still occasionally will book myself for a tournament on the Masters division, and that's a lot of fun because a lot of people their competition career ends like when they're 22, 23. So to go out there 48, 49, 50 to try to take a medal is it's an experience. And I hope to keep doing it till I'm 60. So I'm going to try to get a few more of those in. But yeah, that's pretty much it right now. Yeah, I watch martial arts go through a lot of changes. Right now, it's that MMA, sportive driven landscape, which is fine. There's a lot of good benefits to all that too. And if anything else, it'll keep you healthy, keep you in shape, and that's why I'll always recommend it.
If it doesn't break you into little pieces, I studied Okinawan Jiu-Jitsu for 5 years.
Oh, okay, cool.
Got to green belt, and Evans got his Tai Chi mastery or something close.
I wouldn't say mastery, but I practice Tai Chi and Qigong, so it's very healthy, very healthy.
Oh yeah, I used to do push hands. Push hands is a lot of fun. Yeah.
So and then just give us a little bit also of how you coordinate all these things together, like your jiu-jitsu, your love of wrestling, comic books, and horror. There's a nexus there, don't you feel, to all this stuff? What do you feel that it is, and what does it mean to you?
You mean what connects it all together?
To you, what connects it all together? Obviously, you're the connection that puts all these things together. But what inside of you do you feel makes it all come together as one thing?
Well, I think what happens is you have to ask what attracts you to it, because if you were to go to Barnes and Noble and you were to walk past the magazine rack, that's a lot of magazines. and somebody's going to walk by that and they're going to ignore every magazine on the rack, but they're going to catch Field and Stream out of the corner of their eye, and they're going to get Field and Stream. And somebody else is going to get, Popular Mechanic, and somebody else is going to get Empire or whatever. And whether you're watching a movie, whether you're watching or reading a book, or whether you're doing taking part in an activity, sometimes you have to ask yourself, what attracted me to that? Like, why do I want to do that? Does somebody read a travel magazine because they want to visit all these exotic places around the world? Or are they just tired of working a desk job? It's just that, they're stifled in a job, but they read a book or a magazine. It's got all these pictures of all these places they could go, So sometimes there's psychological things that drive interests. And even the people who are very enthusiastic about a hobby don't know why they're enthusiastic about it, because they never really sat back and thought about it. So I think that there are elements in people's lives that draw them towards certain things, and you'll start seeing a connection or common threads among people who are fans of particular things. If you talk about the comic book movies, a lot of people go and watch them because they just want an escape, and it's fun. A lot of people may be driven towards sad movies because maybe their mindset at that time is just they're down, and they don't want to see somebody laughing or smiling. They're not into it, so they're going to.
But for you, I'm trying to find out what it is that attracts you so much to it. Because what's interesting about you is that you love some of the most violent stuff in the world, but you seem like one of the most calm and non-violent people that you could probably run across. And so it's fascinating that because I'm sort of the same way. I love all the same stuff you do. I'm not a violent person by nature, but I am fascinated by it, and I think we share the same thing. So I was trying to, drill into you to see what I see within myself, this sort of stuff.
Well, sometimes for me, a lot of that stuff I enjoy because it allows me to go back in time, because I can't go back to 1980, but I can watch a movie from 1980 or read a book from 1980 and get caught up in the moment and re-experience times in the past. Like I was reading a book, I think it was published in 1981, and it's very, very 1980s in its style. So it kind of takes you back. So sometimes what motivates me is to revisit not just the work, but also the time period they were done, and to revisit like little, bits and pieces of my life that are, in the past. Other times it's, you kind of wonder like why did I choose this, or why did I like this, or what connects it. And sometimes I think what it is I think that you see elements of your own life in them, even though you might not live. Like, you might watch a Western. You may, never been on a horse a day in your life, but you might remember those Sundays when the Westerns were on TV, and you used to watch them with, your relatives and all that, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So a lot of times it's revisiting the past and re-examining it. Another thing I like to do is I just like to cast a more positive light on some of these things. Like with a lot of the horror stuff I write about, I try to point out that this stuff has value, and it's not just junk. I mean, well, there is a lot of junk, but some stuff is actually really worth watching, and you can learn from it. And I just did one on The Sword and the Sorcerer, which most people say, oh, it's a cheesy movie, it's funny, it's silly. Well, yeah, it is. It's funny. It's cheesy.
I saw that in the theater like 4 times because I loved it so much, and there was not much to do that summer. But I dug that film.
It has such a huge cult following to this day. It just was the perfect movie at the perfect time, and it just had that theme of, you get screwed over by a corrupt system, and through force of will, you fight it and you come out on top. And I think that kind of simple message resonates. And that was very 80s in its style. I mean, it came out in 81, but it's still, it doesn't hold up as well today in some ways, but in other ways it's timeless. So, I'm going
to have to show that one to my daughter. That's a great suggestion. She likes these kind of crazy, cheesy films. So I'm going to show her that one and say, this was big when I was a kid.
That was real big. That was real big. That was a big hit.
Subjecting me to this, so.
But like I said, like everybody says, it's cheap, it's silly, it's funny. Yeah, but there's also some other things going on there that make it popular. People wouldn't be watching it 40 years later if the only thing carrying it was some sword fights and some silly humor. There, So I like to point out some of the more valuable aspects to some of these B movies, and you'd be amazed how much out there is actually far better than people give credit to it.
Absolutely. Tony, plug anything you want to plug.
Coca-Cola is good. You ever have it?
You're very healthy. Yes.
This show could be sponsored by Diet Coke within that number of Diet Cokes I swallow during the show.
Yeah. Geez, what can I plug? Well, if you just go on Amazon and type my name, Anthony M. Caro, you'll probably find some of my Velas, which are serialized. It's Amazon serialized fiction, nonfiction platform. Again, you got my 2 books, and then if you want to go to horrornews.net, and you'll see my Sword and the Sorcerer feature on the landing page, and that's pretty much it. I don't have a lot up for sale.
No.
Do you ever find yourself up in Northern California, Tony?
Not as much as I'd like to. I keep wanting to take the Pacific Coastliner, which is Amtrak, where I can get Amtrak from LA.
Patience. That takes a little bit of patience to take that route up.
I went across country with it, dude. I went from Philadelphia to Reno, Nevada on Amtrak.
Wow.
It was 72 hours.
That's an adventure. That's an adventure for another time. But if you ever come up north, I'm absolutely fascinated. I mean, I could talk to you for another hour. We didn't even get to half the comic book questions I wanted to talk to you about, and I didn't even bring up Mystery Science Theater 3000, which I think helped bring all this stuff back to the forefront for a new generation. But we'll have to have you on for another show, because I'm not done talking to you about this horror and comic book stuff.
Well, that'd be cool, yeah. And
I hope you can be a guest again on the show.
Absolutely, and I got 3 new books coming out in the next 2 years. So I can tell you about them when they come out, and just reach out to me. If you want to talk about comics or you want to talk about literature. I like a lot of. I've been getting heavily into some of the fiction reading, some paperback reading lately. So maybe I'll write about some of that. But man, I'm available. I'm here. I'm right here.
And let our fans know how they can get a hold of you through social media.
If you go on Twitter, it's Tony M. Caro at Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, same address. And I just started TikTok. But mostly Twitter and Instagram would be the best places to find me. So.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Oh, thank you.
You've been a wonderful guest. Really enjoyed talking with you, and we are looking forward to having you in the kitchen. I'm glad you took your beanie off because it's like 90 degrees here in Northern California, and you were having that beanie on was making my head sweat. So, but really, we appreciate your congeniality, and you're a man of incredible depth and character. So look forward to having you on the show again, hopefully soon.
As long as
Renaissance man.
As long as I'm not a man of incredible debt, I will be.
There you go. There you go.
That's for later on. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll see everybody next week. Good night, everyone.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.